Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. Do you have your notepad and your pen handy? I hope you do, because I want you to take notes. I want you to make a commitment that you'll jot down some sort of action item that you can implement in your business today. That's what this is all about, implementation to drive your business forward. Let me ask you this. Is your digital marketing strategy effective? Your current strategy, what you're employing right now, is it working? How do you know? I was recently exposed to an excellent podcast from a company, Freakonomics. It's the same as the same people that wrote the books, and there's a series of books in there, Freakonomics. I'll put a link in the description. And they had a two-part series. The second part in the series of the podcast explored the effectiveness of digital marketing. And just to give credit where it's due, where I was turned on to that was from Dr. Peter Attia's podcast. So I'll put a link to his as well. He has all sorts of topics, primarily surrounding health issues. But both of these, if you've never listened to either of these podcasts, you're probably in for a treat for the first time that you do so, and you may wish to follow along. Links in the description to both of those. But anyway, when I was listening to this Freakonomics podcast in which they explored the effectiveness of digital marketing, and they used as a case study eBay, it got me to thinking. And I was very cautious, and I want to put out a caution to you after you listen. I would recommend you listen to it. It's a quality piece of journalism. However, I would caution, it seemed as though the expert involved formed a particular conclusion, and I'm worried that some people listening to that might form a conclusion that wasn't necessarily obvious or wasn't intended. And that is, it seemed in the case that, spoiler alert here, maybe if you don't want to know how that turned out, you want to go and listen to that one first and come back to this. But it seemed that the expert was concluding that eBay was not getting good return on their investment. In other words, their digital marketing strategy was not particularly effective. And I think he was probably right in that case. However, it may be that people listen to that piece of journalism and they come away thinking that digital marketing in general isn't effective. And that certainly wasn't the conclusion of the journalists or the authors or the experts involved in this. But I did feel that it kind of, my sense was it came away with that sort of conclusion. And I thought, well, that's not accurate at all. However, why I would describe it as good journalism is it did cause me to do some introspection. It caused me to reflect on the issue, ask some questions, and in that regard, it was very effective. And so I'd like to give you maybe a few different angles, some other things to keep in mind as you consider this, and you should be pondering this question: is your digital marketing effective? Marketing is, as they say, not so much a science, it's a lot more of an art, but I like to challenge and push back on that and say, well, let's try to make it as much of a science as we possibly can. And that means we need to operationalize things, we need to quantify things, we need to measure as much as possible. And in this particular Freakonomics podcast and this study that this expert was brought in to look at eBay, and they were spending a fortune by most company standards. They were spending a fortune on digital marketing. The numbers they were spending would far exceed the average person who watches this podcast and this vlog, what you would be typically spending. But the concept, there's still lessons to be learned. In that particular study, the people who were looking at it and the experts, they were measuring, and that's of course a critical thing. You have to measure, but what are they measuring? What are they looking at? In science, you try to choose one thing, you create a hypothesis, your expectation, your educated guess of what you suspect is happening based on certain conditions, and then you have a control group, and then you have an experimental group. And what there were a couple of challenges I would give on how not so much the efficacy of their methodology, but just how you might come away with maybe a skewed conclusion based on their research. So there's two areas that I looked at and challenged. Number one, they were looking at when you look at a control and an experimental, or you're comparing two things, what they were looking at is periods of time. So they were looking at what was the results in terms of sales for a particular time when they were doing their specific advertising, and when they didn't do it, they had a hypothesis of what they expected. And I think if memory serves me correctly, eBay suspected that their sales would be reduced by 5%, and it was far less than even 0.5%, or it was far less than 1%. It was less than 0.5% that their sales were impacted when they stopped doing their search engine marketing, their pay-per-click advertising, their digital marketing campaign. And so that was one thing that they did. And so that's good. It's good to compare. The second thing they were doing is they were looking at a variety of forms of pay-per-click advertising, or SEM. And so let's delve into some of these things, and I'll explain to you why I challenged some of that. So the first thing, and this is a really important concept here, is that I want to take it back a little further. What you need to do so that you can have effective digital marketing is you need to well define a customer journey, or what they call the trail to a sale, or the journey to a sale. What is the steps? What are the steps? What is the process that your customers go through in order to arrive at a sale? Now, it may begin way back with somebody Googling. So if you think of this in your mind's eye, somebody Googles specific search terms, and maybe they organically, we call that search engine optimization, where organically they find, Google leads them organically to your website, and they end up on your website, and that's the beginning of the journey, the customer journey. Or it may be that you do some SEM, search engine marketing, and that's broken into two primary things. There's a few, but I'm going to talk about two primary ones. One is pay-per-click, where you don't pay a nickel, and that's typically text-based ads. So you see those at the top of the Google search returns, where you see the ads, and they're text-based. You read those ads, and if they are relevant to what you're searching for, you may choose to click on those. You typically would look at the organic returns below those as well, and maybe you would click on one of those. Maybe you avoid ads out of the gates, but if the ad is very relevant and some of the organic search returns are not, you're likely to click on the ads. So they call that pay-per-click. I'm sorry for the very basics here, but some people listening may not understand this. And you don't pay unless somebody clicks on that and they convert to your website. They now land on a particular landing page on your website, where you hope to further convert them into sales and revenue. And so that's one form, where we say in search engine marketing, pay-per-click. And the other would be, say, pay-per-impression, or the display network. So Google has partners with all sorts of websites throughout the world that have ads on them. And you see this. Maybe you go and check your local sports scores, and when you're on your local news site to do that, you'll see a few ads here and there, and those are display ads. They have little banners or little postcard size ads that you can click on, and of course you would visit the advertiser's website by doing that. But they don't just charge for the conversions of people actually clicking on those. They also charge for impressions, or rather they charge for impressions, and it's typically 1,000 impressions. So you pay a certain amount per 1,000 impressions, because it helps you brand, and it is a successful marketing, just getting your message in front of a lot of people. And then there's this term retargeting or remarketing, where if somebody visits your website, you put a little cookie on their browser, and then when they are browsing the web, they end up on some of these sites that we just described, where there are display ads, and Google will serve them your display ads in the display network, because they're more likely to convert on those, since your browser knows that you were on this website, so it serves ads to you of something that you're already interested in. So those are the two different categories. Now, when you're thinking about your journey to a sale, that's maybe it begins in one of these two ways. But often it begins with a search, people searching. That's why Google's such a powerful company, is, search is really important to how we do things in everyday life. And the journey starts there. What I didn't like about the way that the Freakonomics, the eBay study was done. It's not the Freakonomics. Freakonomics was just the journalists reporting on this. The eBay study, they looked at a particular amount of sales. They hypothesized that they would lose 5% of their sales by not doing the commitment to advertising. They were doing this pay-per-click advertising, and it turned out to be far less than that. What I didn't like about that is there are too many steps of conversions between the search and actual revenue and sales. Now, maybe for eBay, it's much different than yours. And that's another thing that I want to talk about maybe a little bit more in depth later, but let's just mention it now, is you are not eBay. And eBay is different. Every company's marketing strategy needs to be specialized or customized, rather, to fit your industry and your size of company, your demographics, the demographics of your target market, your geography, and so on. Anyway, this point that I was trying to make is there are several steps of conversion typically in the customer journey to a sale. And if you're looking at the end conversion of sales as a number that you look at, and your hypothesis is how much, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's too many variables in between. And so I would say there might be good correlation, that might be a good correlation to observe and to strategize around, but it's not necessarily causation. Just because they stopped advertising and they noticed that their sales were only affected by a certain amount, there's too many conversions there. What I would recommend you're looking at is, if you're going to do an experiment like this, and that's what I really think you should do. Like I said earlier, you want to try to make things as scientific in marketing as possible, and therefore you should measure, you should experiment, you should test, and you should compare two different conditions, but you want to have as few variables change between those two different conditions as possible. And so I would look at, if I was going to reduce my advertising or completely cut off my advertising, my pay-per-click, to begin with, I'd want to know, is it the pay-per-click, or is it the pay-per-impressions, or is it both? Am I completely cutting out all my search engine marketing? And if so, then I'm looking at maybe my visitors to my website, or my unique visitors to my website. You see, that's the first conversion. And of course, not every unique visitor to my website converts into a sale. So there's maybe several stages. Maybe it's from there, they then add to cart, that's a conversion. And then after adding to cart, they get to the, they fill out their, they log in, depending on your business, they log in, or they fill out their shipping information. All of these things that a customer does, each of these steps is a conversion. It's getting closer and closer to your desired result, which is the revenue. And by simply comparing the amount of advertising to the sales, so many variables in between there, I think it can mislead you. There's nothing wrong with doing it as long as you understand that it's not as scientific as it could be. So I would much more prefer for my business and for yours that we would look at something like, okay, we're going to compare the amount of web traffic that we got, our first conversion, how many clicks did we get when we advertised, how many visitors to our website did we get. And of course, on any given month, you can look at the amount of people that click on an ad, or rather, what sources did people follow to get to your website? Was it organic? Was it just because of your search engine optimization that they entered key terms that are found on your website and they ended up there without clicking on an ad? Or did they actually need to follow an ad? You can do that on any given month just looking at your sources. Sort of all over the map here. That was one other thing that I challenged on this, and I would bring up again as a difference between your business and another. And I've seen this in companies I've worked with before, where they were using as a key term eBay. They were using eBay as a search term. And if your particular company is unique and the name of your company is unique, you have to ask yourself whether that is really necessary as a key term. So let's say if you are selling a particular product, widget A, and there are many companies that sell widget A, then of course you've got to make sure as a search term that you are advertising, you are bidding up to be one of the ads that Google's likely to serve to your target market over the competitor ads. That's how the whole process works. And we didn't get into that. This whole video isn't meant to be a tutorial of how to set up your search engine marketing, but rather for you to make sure that you look at these things a little bit closer to make sure you're getting optimum return on your investment. But I digress. Once again, if you are selling widget A and other competitors in the market, you want to make sure that you're bidding so at least on within your geography and those types of things, your ad is being served to your target market. And do you need to mention your name of your company? Is that an important thing? Is that a search term? Or if somebody was actually including that as a search term, here's the challenge I have, is they're probably going to your website anyway. So let's say you are Acme Widgets and you're the only Acme widgets in your area. If somebody uses that as a key term, Acme Widgets, both of those search terms independently, they're looking for you. They're coming to you anyway, and your organic search terms are likely going to lead them to your website. So spending money on that isn't necessarily that effective. And in this, as I understood it, in that study that eBay was doing, they were experiencing a little bit of that, which is there may not be that big a difference because people were already intending to go to eBay to look for certain things. So if their strategy was not to drive people based on a keyword of eBay, but rather, and I'm sure it was both, but on the widgets, if they were focused on the widgets, they may have had a different result. In other words, they may have noticed, well, people came to eBay to buy the widget instead of going to Amazon to buy the widget or to Kijiji to buy the widget, which happens to be owned by eBay, but or Craigslist to buy the widget or whatever. You get the idea. Or to go to Bob's local emporium to buy the widget. So focusing the key term on the widget they were trying to sell would have been a little bit more accurate in my estimation. Anyway, you have to look at these things as it pertains to your business. Are you part of a franchise? Are you part of a market in which you sell a product or service that is universally available? In other words, it's not that unique. People can get it from a whole bunch of different companies. And therefore, I would focus more on the product or service search terms than the name of your company, because people are going to zero in. If they don't know your company, they're looking for your product or services, or products or services that are not too terribly unique just to your business, but you do offer them. Focus your bidding and the amount of money you can pay on those, because that'll lead people to you. If the person is also including in their search the term that is the name of your business, they probably know about you already, obviously, and they're coming to you. So that's not necessarily going to strengthen your position. So that's the one big challenge I had with that, and I want you to consider once again, what are your unique, what is your situation for your business that may differ from another. So be careful. I guess what I'm trying to say in summary on that point there is that be careful trying to mimic or emulate another business or organization's marketing strategy, because they may want to include their business name as an example. It's just one simple example. They may want to do a lot more banner and display network advertising, or they may do much more Facebook advertising and all these kinds of things. So anytime you look to a source like this, and I will reiterate, I think it's worth listening to that study. Go to that Freakonomics podcast and the link in the description, listen to it and take away from it what you can, but be careful. Realize that your business is different than the case study business. In this case, it was eBay. Be careful in making a conclusion that you should do the same as another business is doing. Instead, use it to stimulate your thought process and say, how does it work? And if you are, visit the video on this if you don't know what I'm referring to, if you are unconsciously incompetent on digital marketing altogether, then reach out to us, reach out to another expert source that can help you formulate these things. And I don't have, and our company doesn't have any vested interest in having you spend more and more money on Google. We don't make any money on that. It's Google who makes the money on your budget, how much you spend on your search engine marketing. We would just be there as, and we make money on assisting you. We're essentially your employee who does it, who makes sure that your strategy, what you put in place, makes sense for your business. And what I'm saying is, if you are so inept and you just don't understand how this works, then maybe reach out to a company like ours that can assist you with that. So that was one thing. Customize toward your business. And then also the other point I made earlier was make sure you try to minimize the number of variables that can be at play before you formulate any hard and fast conclusions. Because if there are too many conversion steps between what you, in this particular study, between what you're measuring or the two things you're measuring, the amount of money I'm spending and the amount of sales that I have as the example in this case study, I would say that's really challenging. And another one on that, as just an example, is the volume. Now, a company like eBay, they may say, oh boy, I know there's so many conversion steps, or there's not, probably what they were saying is there aren't that many conversion steps, and there's so much volume that we can rely fairly heavily on the results, and we can make conclusions because of the data size. And that's another really important point, is the amount of data you have to measure going to be so low that it could be really skewing to the results. It can really distort any conclusions that you can make and take away, detract from the relevancy of the data. As an example, maybe you sell really big ticket items or a high level contracts, and you aren't relying on that much volume of individual transactions to make your revenues that keep your company going. And eBay, by contrast, is doing, millions of transactions. So that data set is very different from yours. And so if you try to rely on looking at, well, here's my spend, what is the amount of sales I get out of that? You might say, well, I didn't get any sales because it's too low of a data set. I didn't spend enough money to result or to get any sales or any revenues. So therefore, having a much greater data set as, for example, unique visitors to your website would be much more relevant. So I hope those examples, I know I jumped all over the map on that. If the only thing you take away is that you should be looking at this stuff, you should be measuring, then I have succeeded. You need to measure this stuff. You can spend a fortune on marketing and you can waste a lot of money on marketing. And if a huge company like eBay realizes, wow, we were wasting money on marketing with all the experts they have, then you know that you should be careful as well. And you want to start by measuring things, start by formulating, and let's go back and just do a little bit of a review here. You want to take a look at your customer journey and define all of the conversions. What is it going to take? It may be that some customers skip some of those things. They go right to your their basket, their their cart, and they've already signed in, and there's very few conversions. There's just a couple of clicks. They've purchased the product, depending on what it is you sell or how you sell it. It may be that you're relying on your sales process for people calling in and booking appointments, all that kind of stuff. You have to look at that. You have to well define it. There might be many, many steps of conversions between them initially considering your product to actually owning it or benefiting from it. Or there may be very few, and your strategy should be unique based on that. Just as your products or services are unique, your business processes are unique, therefore your marketing needs to match that. And therefore, when you set things up to measure, the more conversions you have, the more it can be a confounding factor and can really distort the results and the relevancy of the data that you report or that you analyze. So take a look at that and try to set up a scientific experiment with as few variables as possible. And in this case, I am saying that each conversion becomes a variable, and you want to measure on either side of one conversion. As I think about this concept, I realize that depending on the amount of experience you have with digital marketing, some of this may have been like, well, this was just convoluted and I didn't really get what you were trying to get across and everything. And I apologize for that. I hope you got at least one thing out of this that you can say, well, I know where I can get started on this, but I have a lot to learn on this topic, or some of you know so much that it's like, oh no, that's a given. I understand all those things. What I'm trying to get you to do each and every time is to stop and think. And the reason that this particular topic was on my mind is because I was inspired by that particular journalistic piece from Freakonomics. And yet, as inspired as I was, as much as I appreciated it, I also thought, there were some errors there in terms of how I would recommend people do it. And I was concerned that anyone on our team might come away from that with too much of a conclusion. And so just to reiterate, it's like it depends on the business. You can't take one case study and say that's what it would be like for my business and assign causation to something where there's maybe a little bit of correlation there, or even some very significant correlation for one specific business that would be a completely erroneous conclusion to make for a different kind of business. So I just want to stimulate your thinking, get you asking questions. And so I hope you got something out of it. That's where I want to leave it today, but there's a lot to cover on this. Obviously, we're just scratching the surface of digital marketing. And if all of this stuff is just a little bit confusing for you, there's lots of information in addition to the videos I create. There's lots of information out there for you to learn. That's where I got started so many years ago, as I looked at the resource materials that were being produced by Google. I took seminars directly from Google and interacted with Google people, and then I worked with agencies, and I consumed all sorts of information. I did things on my own, trial and error. I even ended up in a lawsuit with Google based on some of this stuff. That's an anecdote for another day. It was actually a pretty interesting one. But I learned a ton from doing this stuff, and I realized that the more you get into it, the more it's like, wow, there's just so much more to learn. There's that whole Dunning-Kruger effect. And if you're feeling that the way I was at one point, I eventually reached out to a professional and said, I need help with this. And I continued to learn alongside that professional. And I was able to collaborate with a professional to get the best results for the business at the time. And I'm recommending the same thing to you. Consume as much as you can, learn as much as you can, so that you're educated for your business and you can be a better collaborative partner with a company like ours. Reach out to us very inexpensively with very minor investments. We can help you get started on all this kind of thing. So I hope you got something out of this. Leave a comment, and whenever you do leave comments, we all learn, and we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.